Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Senior Center Without Walls series funded by the United Way. I'm Lowery Stamen, manager of Metchosin Seniors Resource Center. And today, Claire Lowery and her daughter, Janet Gray, are here, and they're longtime Metchosin residents who are going to share stories and highlights of Claire's 90 plus decades. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Claire and Janet. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lowery. I'm honored and pleased to be able to have this opportunity to interview Mum, and hopefully some of our back and forth comments that ensue will give you just a small window into this marvelous woman's life. And
Well, thank you, Janet. And of course, it's lovely for me to be able to have a chance to go over my life and see, what's been happening.
although we've shared many an experience together, we've never done an interview before. So we have made a few notes, and just in case we get stuck. Claire, you just celebrated your 93rd birthday the other day, and the one thing that I'm sure everybody is really wanting to know right off the bat is, how did you get to the ripe, healthy age of 93?
Oh, well, I think it's my good looks, my charming personality, and let me see, my, what was that there? Oh, yeah, it's how easy to tell a lie, isn't it? So there you go.
It's always good to laugh, and Mum's always been able to create some good laughter with some of her comments and her self-deprecating humor. So here we are in beautiful Metchosin, living on Shianu First Nation territory, where the beautiful camas are blooming and the Gary oak trees are.
Yes, when I was growing, I grew up in Calgary, surrounded by several nations, and completely oblivious till the white man came and took over. So it wasn't until many years later that I was able to join this in the injustice of it all.
Yeah, you grew up around the Treaty 7 territory, the Blackfoot and Stoney Nations, like you said, and you didn't know that much about it. You and I have been learning a lot about it, Canadian history together over the years, and we went to the Truth and Reconciliation event in 2013 in Vancouver together. And we've come to understand different things about that relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, for sure.
Yes, and I keep learning for sure, and hopefully some of this learning that we've had together will affect our life more in the future. And some of the people that have helped me understand this are Emmanuel. Yeah, Arthur Emmanuel. Wagamese is another great writer that's helped a lot, and Thomas King. They've all been helpful in helping me to understand these things.
Mom's a great reader, so she's done a lot of reading about that, and I've learned a lot from her as she's been reading. So your life began in Calgary, Alberta, and Calgary looked a lot different in 1929 when you were born than it does now. It had a much smaller population of around 65,000, as far as I could tell. Most people were immigrants from somewhere. Can you, do you want to say anything about that?
Well,
what Calgary was like?
My mother came from, well, first of all, Calgary is a much smaller population then than it is now. And so we had natural gas come to Calgary sometime in the early part of my life. So I always had that, we always had that advantage of gas in our home, and it wasn't fetching wood or anything like that. And the other thing about Calgary was you did a lot of walking. we had streetcars, and we had a very simple life, I would say.
Your family never owned a car, I don't think, did they?
No, we didn't. Although later Janet will show you a picture of a picnic we went on where we were lucky enough to borrow a car.
So how did your parents end up in Calgary?
Well, Mother was born in North Dakota as her family traveled from Ontario to Canada. And they lived for a while there, and it wasn't, it was just like living in southern Saskatchewan. And it was not very profitable. They came on to Calgary, of course. And that's where
Your grandfather,
we ended up. And then my dad came from Moore's Mills, New Brunswick. So
her grandfather on her mother's side ran a general store, and just holding up a picture there of Luke Draper's there in his white coat at the back of the counter serving some customers. And that's a pretty neat picture that was up on a large wall at the Glenbow Museum.
just one more thing about those 30s. My dad repaired everything and or made everything in the first place. But I can remember him repairing our shoes, and Howard saying at one point that his foot was right out on the cement before Dad got around to fixing his shoes. And Dad would buy a big piece of leather and cut the pieces of leather for all our shoes and sewed them up. And he was very good at making do with what we had.
So Mom came from a family with 8 children, and there they are on one of their
Very few.
family picture or family picnics. They went on a lot of picnics, as I understand it, but there's one where pretty much the whole family's there. The youngest one isn't, and they're all just sitting there on the beach, and they got a ride with a neighbor who had a car.
Yeah, I guess so. And that's probably out just around that first big bend of the elbow. We thought we were having a really big trip that day, I'm sure.
And so you're saying you weren't very far away from home.
Oh, no, it wasn't very far at all, but we thought we were having and it was a lovely spot, yeah.
So here's another picture of her family, a bit more of a formal shot. And it's the whole family minus one of them. What happened to Raymond?
Rainey died of blood poisoning. He got a nail in his hand in those days. They didn't have anything for tetanus.
Mhm.
And so he died
That
just
was-
before I was
that
born.
Just before you were
Yeah.
born, yeah. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned that you were growing up during this Great Depression time in the early 30s, and the reality of the Depression left millions of Canadians unemployed, hungry, and often homeless. What was your childhood like? You've already mentioned a few things, but how did that shape you and your family?
Well, Dad had a huge garden. We had the whole empty lot next door, plus a little bit in the backyard, but mostly the other lot. And he worked that, and we all had to help in that garden. And I remember one year in particular, he picked all the peas and carefully put them in little pint jars and processed them. And he took them out and put them on shelves. And a couple of days later, they all began to fizz. And he had to throw the whole Cooten bottle out. You know, it's just so heartbreaking for him. But that was a very sad story for him.
I understand that your older sister, we haven't mentioned here yet, but your mother died when you were just 10 years old, and that was a pretty significant time in your life.
Yes.
Can you tell us
I
when
was
you were
very-
so young what that was like?
I was very close to my mother and to my dad later, but the hospital at that time wouldn't allow children anywhere near it. And Mom had breast cancer for some time. She was all burnt here by the early radium treatments, but eventually she did get in the hospital just before she died. And they said, the hospital said that Dad could bring one child over for her to see. So Dad took me on his bicycle, on the Barda's bicycle, and we traveled from Hillhurst way over to the hospital, which is, I imagine, about 9 miles. And the one thing about the trip that I remember mostly is seeing Mom and her telling me that she may die tonight and she may die tomorrow. She died the next day.
That was a pretty strong memory for you to have all your life, wasn't it?
Yes, it
Yeah,
was. Yes.
Yeah.
And
So she was in the hospital for just a little while, but there was something about that it's pretty interesting. These days, we have a healthcare system that
oh yes,
pays for things. What was that like for your family?
well, because Mom was an invalid for a while, and I don't know how long she was actually in hospital, but the remaining effect was that Dad carried he had to pay on the taxes on the house. He had to pay some of the debt off to the hospital, and he had 7 kids. And so it took him until 1951, from 1939, to pay off all those debts. And at that point, he wanted to go east to New Brunswick to see where he came from. And so again, I was a lucky one. I was in my first year of nursing, and he took me to on my holiday down to New Brunswick. So I was able to share that lovely time with him.
Yeah, so it took a long time to pay off that those hospital bills for sure. And when you're a single dad at that point, and you have 7 kids, that was no easy task for sure. I just wanted to go back a little bit and ask you about, before we go on to the nursing part, tell me what kinds of jobs, it was hard during the Depression to find jobs.
Oh,
What
yeah.
kind of jobs did your dad have?
Well, Dad only had a grade 5 education. So of course he was doing labor jobs. And so during those 30s, all I remember is him having several jobs in any one day, plus keeping that garden going in the summer, of course. So he worked like a devil, I'd say, to keep that. And I never remember being really hungry. I mean, I'm hungry like other kids, but never was I hungry. We were always looked after well.
Yeah, he did a lot of different things to be a good dad and supply things for you, like you say, from the garden, extra foods, and I guess you had some extended family around too that probably helped out some.
Yes, aunts and uncles. Yeah.
Your youngest sister was only 2 when your mom died, I believe, and what happened there? Who did your father look after all of the kids, or?
Well, we had some wonderful neighbors across, not quite across the street, but the Welches wanted to know if they could adopt Trudy. She was an adorable child at that point, and they wanted to adopt her. She was just, let me see, about 2.5 or 3, and Dad wouldn't hear of it. But still, he did allow her to go over there a lot, and she spent, I would say, most of her time with the Welches, and then the rest of it at our house. So we still had that close bond with each other. But it is significant that, yeah, the 2 families that brought the family up, I'd say, because the Welches were so good to all of us.
You had a very special, tight relationship with all your siblings, really. I know a couple of your niece and nephew that are online right now. Their father, Howard, was a very close sibling to you too,
Yeah.
wasn't he?
Yeah.
You at one point said you'd talk to each other pretty much every week, I think.
Yeah, we talked to each other a lot. I was quite close to Howard, Noreen's dad there. And then Vi was always the big sister. And I think she had felt sometimes a bit like a bit hard done by from the rest of us. But as a mature person, I realized what she gave up for us when she was in her last year of high school and looking after all of us. Yeah. She had.
Yeah, so there was a lot of responsibilities of the older kids with the younger ones during that time.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about your family and your dad doing different jobs. And you've mentioned your garden and some stories about food there. The garden, I just want to go back to the gardening part, because your dad also instilled in you the love of gardening, and that's been something that you've had all your life. And we've got some irises here from your garden.
Well, Dad certainly did instill the love of a garden, the love of watching birds, and the flowers. All those things came from my father, I think. And I've been happy to have a good garden many times since then. I mean, this is the first year I haven't put a garden in. So I've had a long time doing that.
I think Mom's instilled the love of gardening to all of us in her family and beyond too. And she shared a lot of those garden expertise with a lot of us. So another thing that was pretty important in your life was music. And it played a really important role, just as did church. And they often kind of went together for both your family and then beyond. Can you tell us more about music?
Well, Mother provided a strong Christian background for all of us. And she was also quite musical, and she could play the piano well. And so on Sunday nights we had, because everybody had to provide their own music and entertainment, Mom played the piano, Dad played the clarinet, and Uncle Walter would play the violin. And our friends, the Welches, would come over, and we'd have big sing-songs and enjoy music together. So it was I think a really informative time for each of us in our lives. Yeah.
Well, I remember lots of different fun musical events, both choirs that you sang in, either church or community choirs, and lots of car rides singing and camping singing, and concerts that we attended. And there was a tune you were singing just the other day. How does that go?
Oh, let me see.
I'm looking.
Oh, that one. I'm looking over a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. One side is sunshine, the other is rain. Third are the roses that bloom in the lane. No need complaining, the one remaining is somebody I adore. I'm looking over a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. And I must say, every choir is glad I'm not in that choir now. Yeah.
Voices change a little bit. Mom's had a fabulous voice over the years.
Oh, I have not. There's the girl with the voice.
Well, you always enjoyed singing, and,
yes,
and
I
could
love
carry
singing,
a tune for sure.
Yeah, we had some good singing.
Yeah, that's fun. Mom's done lots of fun songs and singing over the years. Another thing, just thinking about that, people and music, everybody whistled.
Oh, that's right. Noreen's father in particular was a whistler. The two boys in our family were big whistlers. And I think most people would go around the house, no matter how good their whistle was, we would be whistling. And so, Laura, you'll have to ask your mom and dad about that. And yeah, they were big whistlers.
I think we've read and heard some about that over the years, that, you know, it takes time and lots of boredom downtime to sort of start focusing on learning how to whistle.
We had lots of time, probably.
So my three sisters and I grew up knowing that you were a human rights and a social justice person. And then in more recent decades, you included the environment and concerns about the climate in what was important to you, and often guided where and how you spent your time. You mentioned some early on young teenage memories of activities that you started doing that influenced you. What were they?
Well, my sister is younger than me. Ruth and I used to go over to the Sick Children's Hospital, which is really a big house in Mount Royal, and we'd go over there and feed the children and play with them, give them their meal, and just keep them happy. That was the first thing. We did that for a couple of years. And then as an older teenager, another neighbor friend of ours, mine, and I helped as assistants down at Girls Town, which was in the inner city. And we taught and sang music and played games with them. So I had an early start to reaching out and having a chance to help.
And you said it kind of made you realize how grateful you were for and fortunate you were with what you had in your own family too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So you went into nursing after high school,
Mhm.
and then you did 2 years of postgraduate nursing in Vancouver, including a short stint at Lady Minto Hospital on Salt Spring Island,
Yeah.
all before you were married in 1954. And you said that while you were on Salt Spring, you sort of, your
Okay.
eyes were opened a little.
Yes, well, during that time, there was quite a crisis over in the Far East Asia. And I wanted to go over and help, and found out that that was nice of me to offer, but they wanted somebody with a bit more experience. So at that point, I was directed by the minister to go down to United Church Training School in Ottawa.
Toronto.
And in Toronto. And I took that for a year. And what it did was the United Church trained people to work either at home or abroad. And as dedicated as I was to the idea of going overseas, it was during that time that I met Jack. And
things changed.
Yeah, things changed. We got married later that fall.
But you were really influenced again at this training school. There was women from all around the world there, and you were particularly influenced by one woman.
Yes.
She was a teacher.
There's one woman, Dr. Catherine Hawken, who had been born in China and came back and worked at the training school. And she was able to give us such a wide view of the world. And for her, I'm so very thankful, because she taught us, that we were we came from a very privileged country. And I think most of us didn't realize that, in the better sense of the word, that we had a lot that we could to learn from the third world.
So this training school was part of, as you said, the United Church, and you've been part of the United Church most of your life now, sort of from the time you were in your 20s up till now. You're still part of the United Church, and you met Dad, who was a United Church minister, and you had 4 daughters. You lived in 3 different provinces. You worked in a lot of churches, and you did a lot of different activities. What were some of the things that you did over those years related to church, and some of the things that you were involved in?
Well, camping was one of them. I'd never been to a camp as a kid, but I ended up, when Janet was a few months old, at my first camp, directing a camp of girls. And I think every summer I was in Hardesty. I directed the camp. So that was a good experience. And as well as camping, I helped with women's work and Sunday school and CGIT. I worked with CGIT for 15 long years. Yeah.
That was for those of you that don't know,
Yeah.
it was about for teenage girls. It was a program for teenage girls.
Yeah,
and,
Canadian Girls in Training.
mhm.
Laurie knows that one. and Noreen.
So you opened your home a lot to different people as in your roles in the community and in the church community.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of people come stay at the house for short periods, long periods.
Yeah.
You help people find work. Yeah, there were a lot of different roles that you played for sure.
Yes.
I remember you always doing something.
We did have a lot of people. We nearly always had an extra person living in our house. And it started with a young girl staying with us when the kids were very small in the Calgary. Yeah.
So another thing about Calgary, which is where you spent quite a bit of time. I remember as a young person doing a lot of swimming lessons and gymnastics at the Y, but you were very involved with the Y as a board member for years. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes, that was a big learning curve for me, being on the board of the YWCA. And at that time, we built a new building. And that was a huge undertaking. And we all on the board worked very hard. We had to not just raise money, but speak on behalf of the YW. And it was quite a learning curve for me, I would say. And one I'm thankful for, of course.
So you've always been a lifelong learner, and you've been curious about so much in life and interested in many things. And I think that's one of the things that you've instilled in your kids and your grandchildren and others. While I was doing my nursing training, you did in the 70s, you did your return to nursing update, and then went on to work in hospitals and did some private care nursing. There's a couple of people of note that you looked after as a nurse.
Well, in the private end of it, I had two patients who were truly different people. One was Diefenbaker, and of course he was all full of himself and he loved to tell me all about how wonderful he was. And the other person was Tommy Douglas, and he was a lovely, lovely human being. And so I'm thankful for, of course, those opportunities. But I also worked in 5 different hospitals in Ottawa on general duty, and did a lot of, as I say, home private duty too. So I had lots of experience in Ottawa. Yeah.
You've mentioned some of your different earlier experiences now, and we haven't mentioned many of the different sort of, some of the different social justice activities that included protesting outside of the South African embassy, and also your trip to Haiti, and then a bus trip to just a couple of years ago to see the old growth forest. Do you want to say something about?
Well, certainly we, there was a group of us in Ottawa that every Friday, we'd try to be not working on Friday. We'd go up and down the South African embassy on behalf of Nelson Mandela, who was still out on, well, actually wasn't even in a nice prison. He was still on the island. So that was wonderful, wonderful news when he was liberated. And what was another thing I wanted to mention? My trip to Haiti.
That was an exposure trip, not a holiday.
That's right. A group of us from Ottawa, there were 7 of us, I think, and we did a lot of homework before we went, of course, and went to Haiti, and we were there for 3 weeks, and we worked and found out how they lived there, and that was such an eye-opener. you just can't imagine the hate, the poverty until you live in Haiti, I think. Yes.
Yeah, and they've also had the injustice of so many terrible storms and earthquakes too, on
Yeah.
top of the corruption and
I don't know how
the
they
poverty.
can continue to live on that island. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real, it really did mark a lot of how you felt about things
Yeah.
after you came back, and you spent a lot of time talking about it to others too.
Yes. Yes, I've done.
This trip that we took a couple of years ago to see the old growth trees, that was a pretty memorable trip for you too, because you were 90 years old. I had told her for a couple of the other bus trips before she was 90 that she couldn't come because, you know, maybe she was a bit too old and stuff. But at 90, she insisted. So she came along on a wonderful week-long trip with a whole busload of people. And what were two things that you, or a couple of things you took from that trip?
Well, one of them was going to Muir's Island and having a very bright Indigenous woman, about 32, show us through a forest. And she was so informative and such a wonderful teacher. And then the other one that I remember is going to that community forest, was it?
Wildwood Community Forest.
Yeah, Wildwood Community Forest, to see how they sustained a wonderful forest, and how important it is to for little parcels of land to be owned by a group like that, because they look at it quite differently than a big
Some of the tree farm
yeah,
licenses.
the
and
tree
stuff.
farmers.
Yeah. Protection of the old growth is something that you've written a lot of letters about over the years, and I'm grateful for your advocacy that way.
Yeah.
Mom's had many different kinds of experiences for sure, and I just want to go back to let's see, we've talked about so many things here. We said at the beginning, I know one of the things about the United Church that I just wanted to touch on again, because you said that it's provided a community wherever you were.
Mhm.
And what is it about the United Church that you value so much?
Well, the United Church has always been a leader in social justice in Canada. Goes back to way back to the Methodist Church, and how they've always cared for other people and for the needs of a community. And so that is one thing, their social justice. And then their work around the world was never one of coming in and imposing on other people. They were more likely to go in as a helping hand. And so I would believe the United Church is still somewhat ahead in working with people and providing leadership for people across the country.
We did actually, the United Church did have a pretty bad history with Indigenous people here, but
yes.
That was something that you remarked about too, that
yes, they were the first church to recognize that they were very responsible, and they apologized right away to the Indigenous people. But even so, it took a long time.
It's an ongoing apology.
Horrible thing.
So at the beginning of this interview, we said we just celebrated your 93rd birthday. And one of the things we did to celebrate was to host a Zoom party where about 60 friends and family showed up to wish you well at that event. So it's obvious at 93 that you've still got lots of relationships with people of different ages. And what is it about, you've always been interested in people. What is it about those relationships that are so important?
Well, we have to be able to see the worth in everybody that we meet. We have to be able to explore how that other person is so important to you and to other people. You have to be able to, I don't know, forgive when you don't want to.
Well, you've worked out a lot of relationships over your life, and it's really obvious when you see such a big group of people show up to celebrate you, which was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
You've mentioned already that your dad gave you a love of gardening and bird watching and stuff. And we've mentioned picnics and stuff, but you did a lot. You've done a lot of things out of doors and with nature, and you got an early start on that. You mentioned things like riding bicycles.
Oh yes, everybody.
To the mountains.
And we would go 2 and 3 on a bicycle, and we'd go on picnics go out on the streetcar, and we'd maybe pick berries. I just remember one time we picked a lot of Saskatoons this way, and they were ultimately put in jars and for the winter. But once I remember going to a house with my honey pail full of berries to sell for 25 cents. And another time I went to a man, we were selling what we made were little hair receivers. And so I went to this man and I said, would you like to buy a hair receiver? They were about that big and they had a little lid on them. Very clever, you know. And he was as bald as a billiard. And he called his wife and he said, do we need a hair receiver? And that's always remained with me.
That was one of your clever little projects to make a few pennies, right?
Oh, Vi helped us make those for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so a love of outdoors and hiking and bicycling. And
yoga was a big thing.
And then also in the 60s and 70s, you did yoga long before a lot of people were doing it. What got you started on that?
Well, yoga, Kareen, her name was, I believe. She had a yoga program, which I followed very carefully because I'd had back problems. So I got fairly proficient at it. Took some courses and that. And then when I moved to Ottawa, I had the chance to, to do something for the newcomers club. So I taught yoga in our church basement. And there was a big room downstairs that we filled with our mats, and we had good yoga. And at the time, the minister had a program on TV. And so Jervis asked me if I'd like to go on with him. So I did, and went on one day and told him all about my yoga in my little yoga outfit. And that was kind of fun to be on TV doing that.
This was in the early 70s, and she did chair yoga right up until she still does it, but she took actual formal classes until last year. Yeah. She's pretty, aside from a broken arm here, she's pretty mobile and flexible.
And lucky.
And lucky, yeah. So let's see, you've been a little bit more limited in terms of activities though in the past couple of years. But you've got a book club on Zoom and you've done a lot of reading. Do you want to recommend any favorite books? Just a couple of them?
Well, I just finished one, which I, of course, highly recommend. And it's Joanne Macy, if you're familiar at all with Joanne Macy. And it's if you can see it up close. Yeah. Yes.
A Wild Love for the World. Yeah.
And
she keeps track of all the books she's read, and she's read something like 32 since January. So
if I could open that.
So another book that you
The Book of Joy is another one I read recently. A lovely story
about the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. Yeah.
And another person I recommend is Arthur Emanuel. And
she mentioned him earlier. He's written some really good books about Canada and
Native people
and reconciliation.
Yeah, reconciliation.
So we're just gonna wrap up here, and we appreciate your attentive ears. And I thought we opened with a little bit of Mom's humor, but I thought we'd close with maybe some words of advice that she has on how to live well. What would have been things that you've stood by you and you've appreciated in your life?
Well, you have to be able to laugh at yourself, to have a good sense of humor, and be able to marvel at the small things in life that are important, like the birds and the flowers, and in individuals, and to be able to listen to young people, what they're saying, what they're doing, and somehow incorporating that into your thought and action. Yes, I guess that would be what I'd say. Living peace. Yeah.
Those are
So
pretty wise words.
Very thankful that Lowery provided this time for us, and the Metchosin Senior Center, and all that they do and provide for the community, because they have been able to bring together the seniors who were quite separated up until the senior center. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you both. Wow. Just riveting to hear all your stories and experiences. And it was really vivid. I know that there's other people here joining us, and I don't know if anybody wants to jump in with any questions, or maybe just thoughts they had as they were listening to Janet and Claire. Feel free to unmute yourself and join in the conversation.
Well, hello, it's Noreen and Dawn. And for those in the group that don't know who we are, I'm Auntie Claire's niece, and my dad, Howard, she spoke of a few times, and my husband, Don. Anyway, we're wondering, when you went, Auntie Claire, to New Brunswick with Papa, how long did you go? And you must have gone to Moore's Mills.
Did you hear, Noreen? So she's wondering how long you went with Papa to Moore's Mills. Were you there a couple of weeks or a week?
Probably we were only gone for 10 days or 2 weeks altogether, and that would include the trip there and back. And we went over to Nova Scotia to a cousin's too. So it wasn't a big, long trip, but I got to see Moore's Mills, and yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I remember one thing particular. We were out at the farm where he was brought up, and we both saw this red bird at the same time, and we were so excited. And it was a red start, I guess. But that was one of the highlights of my trip to Moore's Mills.
Well, that would have been a
Thank you.
big. That would have been a big trip for Papa too, because as you mentioned, he couldn't afford to do too much. So to do a big trip like that, and that was in between your nursing and your training school. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
I see that Hazarian has joined us, or Star has joined us from Mombasa.
Hi there.
oh, hi, Star. Nice of you to join us.
She's unmuted herself, so we'll just see if
It's a he.
Oh, he.
Yeah.
And is he a relative, Star?
Yeah.
From Mombasa.
A brother to Noreen,
Mhm.
and he lives
Okay.
in Mombasa.
Well, we don't have to field too many more questions.
No.
No, if nobody has any more, I'll
Oh, my God.
let's go. Now is the time to jump in. Otherwise, we'll wind it up.
just a big thank you to you for having Auntie Claire and Janet and
Oh.
doing this so that we all have a record
Yeah,
of
my
how wonderful
pleasure.
she is. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys. And thanks everyone who joined us today. Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate the time you've taken and just walking us through your life. I know I'm going to have many more questions as this kind of percolates. So I'll be reaching out to you, Claire and Janet. And actually, I did have one question for you, Janet, just a little bit about you. What is it that you do in Metchosin?
We'll have you over for tea one of these days soon.
I would love that.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I I was a nurse myself for a number of years, but I've done a lot of different jobs, sort of more in the Victoria area in more recent years. But we moved here, and then Mom and Dad moved here after we did. So we preceded them out to the West Coast. But these days I do a lot of growing of food and flowers, and I'm involved in a number of different groups concerned with the environment and Indigenous rights.
Oh, well, wonderful. Thank you,
Yeah.
Janet, for that. Well, I guess with that, we will bid you adieu and thank everybody who's joined us. And I hope you'll continue to join us for our Senior Center Without Walls series. Bye for now.
Okay, bye.